Hello, been wanting to do a pedal video for quite some time. Wasn't sure quite how to do it, and I thought, given that I've just got together all the parts for a new one, I would probably just go through building one and show a little bit about how it's done, how I do it. Disclaimer before I get into all this, I'm not an electronics expert in any way, shape or form. I just learned how to solder reasonably well at one point, and it's much easier than you think. It is not that difficult to build a usable, working, solid, steady guitar pedal, and somewhat on a par with those you'll find in a guitar store or buy online or whatever, retail pedal. If I can do it, anyone can do it, absolutely for certain. A great deal of the pedals that you can buy retail are available to build yourself. The schematics and the information that you need to be able to build the same pedal using the same circuit and the same components put together in the same way. A lot of that's right there online, easy to find. I'll probably put some links in the description here to some resources that I use to get all the kit together and the sort of circuit diagrams and things like that. Alright, so what do you need to build guitar pedals? Let's talk about kit for a moment before we get started. You can probably see some of the bits and pieces I've got laid out in front of me here. I've got a really nasty cheap soldering iron, but it does the job. Really does the job. If you're going to get one, I would recommend you get one with a variable temperature control on it, so you know more or less where you're going with it. Helping hands, these are really useful for holding onto things while you're trying to solder if it's difficult to get in there, and lots of other bits and pieces you might need. Wire strippers, very useful. Multimeter, digital multimeter, you'll probably need one of those. These are really important as well. A decent set of snippers. These are like little proper electrical snippers, specifically for trimming like component legs and things like that. Other stuff, socket bits for tightening up the various nuts and bolts that you'll end up working on when you come to finish off your pedal. They're really helpful, different sizes you'll need, and a decent drill. Now that's for, see, you've got the enclosure here that you're going to end up putting your pedal in. You have to obviously drill holes in this to mount various components. Ideally what you'd want to get is what's called a step drill bit. That's like a single drill bit that gets bigger and bigger as it goes up, and allows you to use a single bit to drill out different size holes. Really useful. You can use a hand drill if you need to. I use a drill press. I managed to get my hands on a cheap one at one point, and that was incredibly helpful, incredibly useful, and I recommend you get that if you can. Okay, so let's talk a bit about components as well. So there aren't really that great many different types of electronic components out there. There are, you know, a core fundamental few components that if you understand what they are when you're looking at them, and how to identify the values and things like that, then you'll do okay. But speaking about guitar pedals specifically, there are some basic components you need. So the first one obviously is going to be the enclosure that the thing is going to end up going in. Secondly is a way to actually get all the components together and working with each other, and in this case I'm using a pre-built PCB board. You can see it's just a basic circuit board with no components on it. This one comes from a great company called Jedspeds. These guys do some great kits. You can, if you want, buy a complete kit, comes with all the parts, even the case, everything, just all apart, and then you build the thing yourself, and they're really good for that. Or you can just buy the PCBs from them, or just, you know, variations of the kits basically, and they have lots of kits available. Another worthy mention, in the UK here we have another company called Fuzz Dogs, do the same thing, and they're as good as well. Brilliant. Used them both over the years, and they're really good, and they're really helpful too if you get stuck with anything. They're both great at helping you out. Okay, so we've got the case, we've got the PCB. Talking about what's going to go on the case, obviously you're going to need something to plug your guitar cables into. So you've got your sockets, your jack sockets there. We've got a couple of new tricks there, and then there's a foot switch itself. This is what's called a 3 PDT switch. You can see it's got 9 little point terminals on the bottom there, but it's basically just a foot switch for kicking it on and off. If depending on the pedal you're building, it's going to have controls to change various values. If it's a drive pedal, it might have like a gain port, and it might have a volume port and various things like that. So you're going to need these sort of things. This is what's called a potentiometer. And you might need a number of those. Then you're going to have to power the thing. Now, a lot of people power pedals on batteries. Most retail pedals come with the ability to power on battery. I don't do that. I like to use proper power supplies and power my pedals from those. So when I do build a pedal, I don't bother with a battery connection. You can put one in if you want to, but I just go with power supply. And for that, you're going to need a little power socket. So that's where the power connects. Other bits and pieces, obviously. The pot's going to need a knob, so we've got a knob here, this type of thing. Usually these tighten on with a grub screw onto the shaft of the pot. Other things you're going to need, you're probably going to want to know when the pedal's on or when it's off, so for that you're going to need a visible LED. So you're going to need an LED like this. 5mm LED is typically the one you would use, and then something to actually sit that in on the case itself. So this is the sort of thing that just bolts into the case, and then the LED sits in that and is held in place, and then you can see when the pedal's going on and off. Then you're talking about components that actually go on the PCB board themselves, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but there are some generic types of components that you will use. Things like capacitors, resistors. Let me see, I've got tons of these things sitting around here. Resistors, you might be using diodes, this sort of thing. Can you even see that? Yeah, a little diode. Some FETs, these types of things, transistors, and what else? Little IC chips as well. You probably can't see these. I haven't busted them out yet because they're a bit sensitive. But that's like a little what you might call a microchip, but it's yeah, it's the brains of the thing. And then other little parts. I mean, this is specific to this pedal. You won't find this in all of them, but this is a little internal trim pot. This gets mounted on the PCB and allows you to make adjustments to certain things that once set you can button the whole thing up and it's left and it works just how you left it. And so I'm not going to talk too much about technique on soldering and things like that. I'm just going to get into building this thing. And this is going to be an MXR Phase 45. It's not going to look like one when it's finished, but it's going to sound just like one, and the circuit's going to be exactly the same. Alright, here we go. We had to have a break then because we ran out of tape on camera. Tape, you don't run out of tape these days, do you? Ran out of memory on the SD card. Alright, we're back cracking. Right, well anyway, we're all done, all the components are on the board, we're all soldered up, everything's good. So, we're going to have a little bit of a clear up and then a bit of a, just a catch up on where we are and a reorganisation, and a chance to just look at the bits we've got left to do. Okay, so we've got our IC circuit board all buttoned up there, everything on it. We now need to turn this into a guitar pedal proper, so we're going to have to start working on this to get everything mounted on. So there's really only one last thing to solder on to the PCB board, and that is this. The actual potentiometer that controls the variable value on the circuit. Now there are 3 holes on the top of the PCB to do that, and this wasn't an angle mounted potentiometer, it's just a straight one. So I have a bit of a choice of how I have to space everything out inside the enclosure here and make everything work properly. Do I want to mount this straight to the board and have the board hang off the potentiometer? Gives the board stability within the enclosure, but may or may not provide us with the space that we need to get everything in there and working properly. I suspect though it will, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a look at how this goes together and see which pin needs to go with what, and then see how that would mount, and just kind of get an eyeball on everything and see how things are going. So yes, alright, so you might notice a bit of continuity error on this one because I'm spreading this across a few days, taking my time to make this video. So t-shirt change and things have moved and stuff. But yeah, reason I took a break on this one was I wanted to have a think about how I wanted to mount the PCB with the potentiometer to the case now, and I'm going to try and improvise something using a piece of strip board. So let's see how that works out. It may or may not work, might be doable, might not, but let's see what we can do. So okay. Happy days. Right then. So at this point, I think we're happy to go and drill our enclosure. So this next bit's going to be quite fun. Right, we're in my garage now. It's an utter shithole. I get up to all sorts in here, and it's just the general dumping ground for the house. So excuse the mess and the surroundings. So drill press. We've come down here with our enclosure and all our bits. We've got our PCB and all the various components that are going to mount to the enclosure. Only thing I really use for this, as I mentioned earlier, step drill bit. If you can't see that in there, I've got slightly different bit, but it's basically the same thing. That's what we're talking about, step drill bit. Lets you use the same bit to drill a number of different size holes. Incredibly useful. You get a few different types. I'm going to try and get away with using just the one, but we might have to swap one out. So typically what I do is I have to mark up the enclosure so I know where things are going. Sometimes I print out something like this, which is like a drilling pattern. It's easy to tape to the thing and mark out where your marks want to go. Other bits and pieces you might use, centre punch to actually mark the enclosure with your holes. What I tend to do as well is hand drill pilot holes with a small drill bit, just so the drill press has got something to lean into when you start drilling, and you're not trying to guide it in and it's slipping all over the place. So this one, because this one's nice and easy, we've got one knob, literally one knob on the thing, and I'm gonna want that to go somewhere near the top, and I'm just going to basically measure it and eyeball it, and then drill my hole from there. So let's do that. Right, so we've drilled all our bits, we've used our drill press, and we now end up with this. Everything's on it, the jacks are in there, the switch, the LED mount, the power supply, and we look like that. So now we have to wire it all up. Alright, so we're back in the man cave, office, whatever you want to call it. And we've drilled our enclosure and we've mounted all our parts into the enclosure. I haven't really tightened everything up, just kind of all finger tight. Even took the time to bang the knob on there. Had to file down the shaft on the pot because it was a bit tall, but now it's sitting okay. It's not too high, it's not bang flush, but that's okay, I don't mind that. It's sitting up a little bit. Did have a little bit of a problem with space in the top of the enclosure there where I've put the jacks. When you actually go and plug the jack cords in there, it's really tight where the potentiometer is, and there was a bit of a risk of the tips touching the back of the pot and creating problems. But it looks like I've just about got away with it. I've tested it with a couple of jacks that I've plugged in, and there's clearance, not a huge amount, but enough, and I think we'll be okay. So we're okay with that. Managed to salvage some old ribbon cable out of some old computer things, or I don't know where that came from, to be honest. And I'm going to kind of try and use some of this ribbon cable just to keep things neat. We've got to run a bunch of wires, we've got to run a couple off each jack plug, we've got to run a couple off the power connector, everything's got to wire onto the switch, and the PCB board itself. There's a bunch of points there where things need to solder onto. So only thing I've done so far is add a little jumper to the switch, which you can probably just see there. And now I'm going to crack on with doing the rest. So here we go. Right, so I've got it buttoned up on the pedal board now. There was some adjustment to do with an internal trim pot just to get it sort of working how it should sort of work, if that makes sense. And we're just kind of playing around now and just seeing what it sounds like. So without it, this is what we've got. Just doing a single coil telly through Marshall amp with an OCD drive hitting the front end, giving us that sort of grunty tone. So we turn it on and we get this. So a little bit of zoom in just so you can see it doing it. So without. So there you go. I built a guitar pedal and it makes a funky sound and I'm quite pleased with it. Very good. Hope you enjoyed my video. If you've got any questions about it, leave something in the comments. If you want any advice on building your own guitar pedals, you're probably better asking an expert, because that's not what I am. But I just showed you how any old dickhead can do it, if I can do it. So can you? Well done. Thank you.